And the truth is you can't. I was working on an electrical engineering degree and I wanted to finish that, but I also wanted to run my businesses. And eventually I had to choose. The day that I discovered it, they had already stolen hundreds of thousands. I think it was $450,000, refunded all of that money. And I tried to stay in business. This patent troll contacted me and said, give me this large sum of money or I'm going to put you out of business. And you're gonna drown in legal fees.
I hate those kind of people because they're not trying to invent something that is useful to society. They're basically robbers. They're not just robbing you. It's almost like a hostage taking.
Yeah. Several times in my life, like I've lost everything and had to rebuild. There is definitely
become an addict over time.
Gambling.
You gotta love it.
Tiny word choice. Just literally that difference. Can mean the difference between a patent surviving litigation or not.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever-changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we have Riggs Riscam, a third-year law student at the George Washington University Law School with expertise in AI, telecommunications, and patent litigation. Riggs shares his journey from inventor and entrepreneur to law school student and intellectual property attorney. You know what's interesting? He had so many patents that he actually get into intellectual property attorney. Riggs, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Before
Thanks.
we go in the in-depth
Good to be
questions,
here.
because I do have some, do you mind giving us a quick intro on who Riggs is, what's your expertise, experiences, and what keeps you busy these days?
Sure. Well, I'm an inventor and an entrepreneur, and I did that. I started companies and invented products for about 22 or 23 years before eventually deciding to go to law school. I'm just finishing up I'll start my last semester of law school in a few weeks. And so I'm just finishing up and getting ready to take the bar and become a lawyer next year. In addition to that, I've got 6 kids and 2 grandkids. So
It's
have a lot
amazing.
that
And
keeps me
not a
busy.
lot of people wants to go back to school, at this stage of their life. Most of the time they just want to go in early and that's it. Why did you decide to go to law school?
So when I was younger, especially kind of while I was in high school and then right after high school, I always just wanted to be an inventor and an entrepreneur. That's just what I wanted to do. And so I started super young. I started businesses when I was really young, and I was already running a business when I started college the first time. And eventually my businesses got to the point where I just really couldn't do both. I had eventually several locations and more than 100 employees, but it came to a point where I just couldn't do school and the businesses, it's competing time constraints. And I really enjoyed learning and always kind of wanted to go back. And then we'll talk about this more later, but I had all of these experiences with the law when I was running my businesses and inventing and, patents and litigation and all kinds of things. And so it always just created this interest in law and learning in general, but specifically law. And so so I always kind of thought, well, someday I want to do that. Someday I want to do that. And then when COVID came, most of the the business I was running at the time was mostly run out of the Philippines, and for because of COVID and some other reasons, I just had to slow that down and thought, okay, well, what am I going to do right now? And I thought, oh, this is if I'm ever going to go back, this is the time. And so I actually had to go back and finish my undergraduate and in order to go to law school. So when I finish in May, I will have gone for about
That's
5
amazing.
consecutive years.
And not a lot of people think that you can actually build a successful business, a thriving one, while you're still in school. How did you manage that?
Well, I mean, so this is my first businesses, and for a while, like I was doing kind of part time, and so this was like in the late '90s, just to kind of set the stage. And honestly, like you really can't. The truth is that you can't. I was trying to do both because I wanted to, I was working on an electrical engineering degree and I wanted to finish that, but I also wanted to run my businesses. And eventually I had to choose. And I chose business because I was always excited about that and knew I could come back to school. But the truth is you can't, but you can absolutely, while you're in school, start something on the side and kind of
So
grow
basically,
it.
you
But at a
can
certain point you have
build
to
it in
choose.
such a way that the only constraint that it has from growing is your time. So you actually set it up so that when you dropped out from school, you actually took off even more.
Yeah,
What kind
yeah,
of
I'd say that's
products did
true.
you invent back then?
So let's see. The first product that I invented that was sold commercially. So I invented some other things that didn't work out before this, but in the early 2000s, this was kind of back before. Today everyone uses their cell phone for business, and maybe even small businesses, use their cell phones. But this was back when if you were a legitimate business, you would have a business phone system and everyone had one on their desk. And the first thing I invented that sold really well was this. So I had run a business, and I was tired of paying these phone system installation people that would be like 30 grand and they'd come in and install this phone system. It just felt like a lot of money for what you got. And so I built a version that it fit in a box, and I sold it in Costco and Sam's Club and some other locations. And basically a business could just like go to Costco and buy a phone system. And what made it unique was the setup process that I had, because normally you would have to hire
Yeah,
somebody to do that, but I created this system that allowed you to set it up yourself and sold that in Costco. So that was kind of my first invention that became commercially successful. And then after that, this was back when you
yeah,
would get all these calls all the time from call centers, and you'd say hello and there'd be like this awkward pause, right? And you say hello, and
yeah,
then maybe a minute, not a minute, but a few seconds later, what felt like an eternity, they'd say hello, and then you knew they didn't hear you say hello, and it was a bad start to the phone call. So inevitably, people would hang up on the contact center. And I owned
yeah,
some contact centers at that time. And, we hated those dialers. You had to have them
yeah,
because your agents weren't productive if you didn't have them. But if you had them, then, everyone you called was upset. And
yeah,
it made for a bad experience. We were doing political surveys. So we
yeah,
wanted to get, people excited and engaged to participate in the survey. And so I invented this system where it was able to be actually just as efficient and productive
yeah,
as the ones that had that delay, but without any delay. And I had several issued patents. I think I had 3 issued patents on that, and I eventually sold those, with a little bit of other technology. In I think 2013 for $6 million, which for
that's
a
freaking
company that
amazing.
maybe had 5
Yeah,
or 6 employees was pretty exciting. And I was young, it was fun. So, and then after I sold that in like 2013, 2014, I knew that the
yeah,
industry was moving in the direction of AI. And so that's when I started my AI inventing and just invented different,
yeah,
systems for doing AI. And then lately I've been working on, I have 2 pending, in addition to the 6 issued, I have 2 pending
yeah,
patents on systems that make lawyers more
You know,
productive using AI.
that's amazing. That's
So
genuinely
that's a
amazing.
brief overview.
I think those dialers, correct me if I'm wrong, they work in such a way that one dialer calls up maybe a few people at the same time, and whoever answers first gets transferred to the
Hmm.
one who is attending the call. And sometimes, if two people answers and though there's
That's
no other
exactly
people
right.
who's available to take the call, then they just wait. Yeah, yeah,
Yep. Yeah. And so what
yeah,
my patent was on, okay, so what they would do is when you answered, they would listen to you say hello and then listen to that
yeah,
hello and say, is that a hello or is it something else? And if they determined it was a hello, they would transfer you to an agent, which, excuse me, which is inherently, sorry, I just need a little drink there. Okay. So that's inherently problematic because no matter what, the agent will never hear the person say hello. And so what my system did is it said, okay, well, instead of waiting until we hear the hello and then making a decision, we're going to always connect the agent to the call that's most likely to be the next real person. And then if they're
yeah,
not a real person, we can take that call away and give them another one. And so it changed the order by which it did and the way things were listened to and processed. And
yeah.
I actually had my patent
Did
issued on
it
that
became
that
more
element of
effective
it.
for the
So
people who use the system? Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. The company that purchased it from me still sells. It's now part of the nice CX1 platform, which has been
yeah.
extremely
You
successful.
know,
So people who have
for
it love it for
inventors,
sure.
most of the time, your product fails. I mean, that's just the fact of life. How important is it for someone, may inventor, engineer, whoever is trying to create something, to not, be discouraged by those failures? Yeah,
That's an interesting question. Just because
yeah,
part of being an entrepreneur and just part of my life, like I've dealt with some absolutely devastating failures,
yeah,
and not necessarily just failures in inventing something that doesn't work out right, but I actually had. So I told you the thing about the company was called Simplephones. We were in Costco at the time. I had my call center companies as well, and we were actually robbed. So a group of 3 or 4 conspiring employees that had worked for me at the time, they were each other's checks and balances, and they've figured out this system where they could falsify data
yeah.
and basically steal from my clients. And the day that I discovered it, they had already stolen
That's tough.
hundreds of thousands. I think it was $450,000 in the end. Yeah, it was crazy. And
Yeah,
and so I was faced with an interesting choice at that point. I could either
yeah,
decide to hide it from the clients, which is what they were doing, or tell the clients and have to basically go out of business by refunding all that
yeah,
money because I didn't have hundreds of $1,000s sitting in a bank I could just dish out. So it wasn't much of a choice for me. I didn't want to wake up every day knowing I'd participated in that. That just wasn't something I wanted to do. So I
yeah,
refunded all of that money, and I tried to stay in business, but a
yeah.
year later or whatever, I was out of business and lost absolutely everything. And so that was before. Okay, so that would have been like
Yeah,
2005,
I was born
2006
by that
time
time.
period, and so.
Yeah,
I've yeah, I've got kids that were born into that time as well. But yeah, so anyway,
yeah,
I even though I did lose everything, I had to just totally rebuild and ended up building the dialer company that I then sold. And so several times in
yeah,
my life, like I've lost everything and had to rebuild. And so honestly,
yeah,
like being an entrepreneur and an inventor is a hard life. You're going to have times where just you have to take risks, and risks
yeah,
come with risk. They come with the downside. And anyway,
yeah,
so but you've also got to be resilient. If you know, so I don't take those kinds of
yeah,
risks anymore. I'm kind of too late in life for that now. But when you're getting started, and
yeah.
if you want to be an entrepreneur and inventor, you got to take risks, and that'll probably mean starting over at least once. And you just gotta
Especially when you're a young man, you
do
gotta
it.
do
Just got to
those
keep
risks
going.
because you're gonna regret it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's so true. I A lot of times I think, oh, okay, well, this thing didn't work out or
yeah,
that thing didn't work out. Like if I could go back and not make that mistake? Would I? And so,
yeah,
the theft is a good example. I mean, even as tough as that was, the business that replaced it was
yeah,
so much more successful than the business I lost. And so, it's interesting the way life turns out. I mean, when you
yeah.
rebuild, you can rebuild better. So, you gotta
And
swallow those bitter
I
pills,
love
but
the. I
the
think we
result
need to
can
pinpoint
be
the
can be
fact
much
that
better.
instead of just being a conspirator to the fact that your some of your employees are stealing from your clients, you actually refunded those money because there's nothing that is more important than your reputation. Yeah,
Yeah, I appreciate that. I actually had several people, including one of the clients who I refunded, tell me that it was a mistake. I had a client who said, hey, we didn't know we'd been robbed.
yeah,
Like we would have never discovered it. You could have
yeah,
kept your business and stuff. And I appreciate that point of view. It was nice of him to,
yeah,
um, you know, give me his honest advice, but I'm glad I didn't. It just, it would have
yeah,
sent the rest of my life in a negative direction. And
yeah.
so, as hard as
It's
that
tough.
was, and it was hard, by the way, it was really hard calling all those, just like knowing, I had a lot of employees. I probably had 80 to 100 employees or more
Yeah,
at that time, part-time call center workers. So it's not the same as full-time salary people, but still, it was a lot. I was a young person, and it was a really hard time.
yeah,
Just like horribly difficult to have to go through that, but
yeah. It's hard to call up
worth
the
it.
people who works for
So
and say, "Hey, we might be failing, and we might, you might lose your job." It's tough. I don't know the feeling, but just imagine having the feeling that their lives on some point dependent on you, and yes, I can't even express it in such words. It's hard. Yeah, for every invention that
yeah, it was
you've
hard.
made successful, how many else failed? Yeah,
I don't know if that's possible to quantify, because I haven't had an invention that like just
yeah,
failed in terms of not working, because when they
yeah,
don't work, I just keep
yeah.
working on it
Absolutely.
until it does. Do you know what I mean? And so, um, you know, so in a lot of ways, it's like everything I sat down to build. I think it's probably true that everything I sat down to build,
Yeah,
at least everything that I kept going with, eventually, got built in one version or another. It's really more about how many times does it
yeah.
how many times is it going to not work? How many times are you going to have to adjust it? How many years, how many dollars like do you have to put into it? And so, you know, just I think it's less about how many inventions, but it's just more about,
Yeah,
how long is it going to take before it's to the point where you want it to be? And I'd say on average, I think like a good rule of thumb is it takes 3 to 5 years from when you have an idea until you
yeah.
have something that you're really ready to sell. And so you kind of have to be ready for that, to stick it out for those 3 to 5 years. Sometimes
I
more,
think
sometimes less.
that
Depends on the
point
complexity of the
on why
invention.
it's very important to start young, especially if you want to go in business, maybe in the future, instead of doing it in the future where you have kids, family. Most of the time doesn't work out as fast, and if you have a family, you need that paycheck to come in every single week so that you can feed them. But when you're young, you only have yourself to worry about. You can eat cup noodles for those 5 years and you'll be fine. But if you have a family, you can't do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's tough. I had my kids really young. So I've got 6 kids, and my first was born. So I adopted her later, but she would have been born when I was 19, I think. And I think so then, anyway, by the time I was in my early 20s, I had several kids. And so, yeah, having to, like, when I went through that whole theft thing, I'll bet 3 or 4 of my kids were born at that time. So it's
yeah.
it's tough for sure. Yeah, but absolutely, like before you have a lot of expenses, before you have a
Yeah.
family,
If you
that's a
have a
good time to
message
take a
for
risk
someone
for
who's
sure.
listening, let's not be, because there's already a lot of people who says, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to have this feature, you have to be resilient, you have to be tough, you have to be great at things. If there's someone who's listening, who do you think, what kind of things or habits do you think someone shouldn't have that you think if they start business they would fail? What kind of person would fail? Absolutely, do you think? Yeah,
Oh, wow. I don't know. I've never really thought of it that way. That's an interesting question. I really
yeah,
always kind of thought of it as like, what attributes do you have to have in order to not fail? I mean, so I guess with anything in life, someone who
yeah,
doesn't have the discipline to just keep going is going to fail at whatever they do, right? Whether it's a business or whether it's going to school or whether it's even just having, a regular job. I mean, if you don't have the discipline to keep going, you're going to fail. But certainly, like, to succeed in entrepreneurship, it's even like a bar above that,
yeah,
right? I mean, you have to have the discipline to keep
yeah.
going in spite of
Absolutely.
substantial
And
obstacles.
why did you choose patent law, intellectual property law specifically? Because there's so many other type of law. Why this particular one?
Yeah, so I actually went back to school specifically because I wanted to be a patent lawyer. I think if there wasn't such a thing as patent
Yeah,
law, I probably wouldn't have gone to law school. Because so I
yeah,
had a lot of experience. I mean, obviously,
yeah,
I've received the patents that we've talked about. I have 6 issued patents, and I've got a couple more pending. But what got me interested in patent
yeah,
law was actually litigation, not necessarily. So,
yeah,
really quickly, in patent law, there's 2 components to it. There's what they call prosecution,
yeah.
which is like the process of getting your own patents, and then there's litigation, which is the process of either suing people for using your invention without permission, which is called infringement, or being sued. And young in my career, so actually, when I first got that phone system business, when I got those phones into Costco, I was approached by what is called a patent troll, and it's someone who has a patent that's not necessarily super valid, but they use kind of some manipulation techniques to get people to pay them to use it. And so I was, just starting to sell my system in Costco, and this patent troll contacted me and said, give me this large sum of money, or I'm going to put you out of business, and you're gonna drown in legal fees, and I'm gonna sue you, and all these things. And he did sue me, and I had to fight him, and it was very difficult at the time. And what was difficult about it, though, was that I, as an inventor and someone who was familiar with the technology, I knew that his patent wasn't valid. I knew that the thing he claimed to have invented, first of all, didn't apply to what I was doing, but also, so which is a term called infringement. So I wasn't infringing, and also the patent wasn't valid. What he claimed to invent in the patent had already existed. And so I had some really good patent attorneys that walked me through it, which was part of my inspiration to go to school later, many, many years later, 20 years later. But so this guy approached me. It was a heart wrenching experience. He's going to put me out of business, and all this stuff. And I said to my attorneys, I said, I don't think that this patent is valid. You know, I also didn't have the money to fight him. And they basically explained to me that, look, if somebody has a patent that's not valid, what you have to do is prove that somebody else invented it first. And they taught me how to do that. I couldn't pay them to do it, because I was just a really small shop. And so they explained how to do it. And I went out and found what's called prior art, which means proof of it existing before. And in this case, I found old phone system manuals. This was before you could search everything on the internet. So I had to physically find them. And so I physically found these 3 phone system manuals that were published years before this patent had been issued or filed. The application had been filed, that showed all of the claims that were in this patent. And so I sent that to the patent office and filed what's called a reexamination. The process is different now, but well, that process that I use actually still exists, but it's much less common. There's a different process now. But anyway, it was successful. And additionally, as a litigation strategy, once they realized that we were just going to fight like that, we were able to settle on very favorable terms. And so uh, interestingly, he had all these suits against big Google and Alcatel and some other big companies at the time. And so it was pretty exciting for me again
He
as a
saw
young
value in you.
person to see like, wow, when I
He
engage in
saw
this
value in your
process. Go
invention.
ahead.
That's why he's going after it.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
well, he saw value in the products that I was selling to the
yeah.
extent that he saw that I was
No,
making money he could
can you hear me?
sue me for.
Can you hear me? Can you see my camera now?
Yeah, you went away for a second, but you're
Yeah.
back.
Think
So
it had some error,
I
but
can see
yeah,
it.
we're
Yeah,
back.
you're back.
Hey, those kind of people. I hate those kind of people because they're not trying to invent something that is useful to society. They're basically robbers. They're not just robbing you. It's almost like a hostage taking.
Yeah,
They're saying, "Hey, I'm gonna kill your business if you don't give me money." Yeah, you
yeah.
know,
That's exactly
yeah,
how it
yeah,
felt,
yeah. It
for
is
sure.
extortion.
It
There
felt like
should be a law
extortion.
that if proven that they're actually just doing that kind of thing, they should be not just sued, go to jail, right? Yeah,
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 so the problem with that though, because I'm an inventor too, right? So I also
yeah,
want to be the person who's saying, "Hey, I have this patent and you're using it." And I don't want to be at risk that if somebody thinks that my
yeah,
patent is frivolous, that I could go to jail, right? And so it's interesting because that opportunity gave me to see
yeah,
like uh, the other side of it, right? So I've defended against a patent infringement suit, and I've also been an inventor
yeah,
who's trying to gain that intellectual property. And so I think what it's kind of
yeah,
shown me is that there needs to be a balance. And I mean, I have to, as hard as that was, I have to be grateful that the patent office had that system where as long as I found
yeah,
the proof that it had already been invented, I was able to eliminate it. And they've actually, it's interesting because of the people who were doing that at that time, they've changed the law quite a bit in what's
yeah,
called the AIA, or the America Invents Act. I think it was around 2008. And it totally changed the patent system in a lot of ways. But one of them
yeah.
is that process
Uh,
that I did would have been
yeah,
even easier today, where you can present you can say, look, this isn't valid. Here's the proof that this
yeah,
existed prior to when this person said they invented it. So I mean, the law is always changing,
yeah,
and that's one of the fun things about studying law too is none of it's settled. I mean, every year new cases come out and things change. Sometimes Congress makes changes, but more often
yeah,
the law just evolves over time as different issues come up and cases are resolved. So it's been fun to study it after years of
yeah.
living through it. It's been fun to kind of study it.
What age did you
You know,
first got your first employee? Part time or full time? Yeah,
I think 19,
and
somewhere around
it was
there.
in yeah,
When I
and it
was,
was from the
yeah,
Philippines, right?
18 or 19.
No, yeah,
No, no. So I definitely hired tons of people in the Philippines later, but my very
yeah,
first set of employees were all in the United States. So I think I opened my first office in the Philippines in maybe
yeah,
2015, maybe 2015.
yeah,
So I actually did. I know there's a lot of call centers in the Philippines, and I did a lot of work in the Philippines, and I owned a lot of call centers. But interestingly, those are separated by time. So I
yeah,
owned U.S. call centers with U.S. employees in like the early 2000s, and then later I hired
yeah.
developers for my AI companies in the Philippines. But I never did call centers in the Philippines,
Huh.
interestingly enough. I did a lot of call centers and I did a
I,
lot of
I
stuff in
I
the
was gonna
Philippines, but
ask
never
because
call centers in the Philippines.
2014 it's not very common to hire someone overseas by that time. I think it went up when COVID happened because we were forced to go to our own separate home offices and got opened up to the point that you don't have to have a physical location to actually conduct business. You can hire anyone from anywhere in the world. How did you come up with the idea that hey, I can actually build something from another country to serve my business in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I actually hired through an outsourcing
Yeah,
company that my brother worked for at the time. So we needed a developer, and my brother worked for this company
yeah,
that hired developers in other countries, and one of them was the Philippines. And so we needed a
yeah,
developer, and my brother said, "Hey, try these guys," and I was like, "Okay, great." And so we hired a couple developers that way, and then I had a dispute later with the company that was doing that outsourcing. And I essentially said, look, long story short, I said, look, I'm not interested in, working this way anymore, but I'll pay you a fee to just be able to hire these guys directly. And, there was some back and forth, but eventually we came to an agreement, and we agreed that, we would stop using them as a middleman. I would pay them a fee, and I would be able to hire these guys directly. So after I paid that fee, I flew out to Dumaguete in the Philippines. And
Yeah.
I think I'd been there once already to visit them, but I flew out there, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to start an office out here, because I, like, when I was using these guys, I was like, wow, they're
Yeah.
super
Yeah.
skilled developers. They're really really friendly guys, and
Yeah.
the Philippines has a great work ethic. Especially in Dumaguete, there's a lot of great universities and
Yeah.
education. People are super friendly. I'm a little biased. Like, I eventually ended up marrying my wife, who's a Filipina, and so, but I just,
Yeah.
I I really enjoy working with these guys. So I went out there, I started an office, and then for several years I would fly back and forth. I counted my passport stamps once, and I have 30 round trips to the
Yeah.
Philippines. But yeah, so I flew back and forth, and just, nurtured that office, and eventually it kind of became the center of the operations, just because the
Yeah.
value I was getting out of those employees was so high for the cost. Yeah, so I really, I love the Philippines. I know there's a lot of stuff that's done there, but
Yeah.
their developers are great. I know
You
they've
know,
got a lot of call centers
I
too,
believe we've talked about
but
this, and you actually
big
lived
fan.
in Dumaguete for quite a while as well. What's your experience with that?
So yeah, I mean, I never lived there consecutively, but what I would do is
Yeah.
I would spend like 3 weeks there, and then fly back for a month, and then spend two. So for about a 3 or 4
Yeah.
year period, I lived there about half of the time. And I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's so I like the Philippines anyway, but I particularly like Dumaguete.
Traffic.
Manila is
Yeah.
nice too, but it's like it's pretty crowded. There's a lot of traffic. The Dumaguete's just kind of
Yeah.
right. It's like, there's enough going on that there's educated people and commerce and business, and
Yeah.
you can get the things that you need, but it's
Yeah.
it's not so big that it's too crazy. And I had a little house there that I
Yeah.
rented, and I had an office and a house kind of in the same building, and I just absolutely loved it. Actually,
Yeah.
married my wife, and one of my kids is half Filipino, and his grandma's out there, and so
Yeah.
I'll still continue to go back. But yeah, it's just love the Philippines.
You know
Amazing
what I like
people, great
about place
place
like
to do
Dumaguete,
business.
Batangas area. It's city enough that you can get anything that you want. If you want to find something, you'll get it. But it's not city enough to the point that there's so much traffic and you can't move around. I think that's good because we need those places, and those places even have still nature on them. Unlike Manila, where the only tree you can see is in a park. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful, like the beaches and stuff. My wife's family lives in Darwin, which is about 30 minutes outside of Dumaguete, and they're, just a short walk to the
Yeah.
beach, and it's really
You know,
nice. It's
uh,
such a beautiful
Yeah.
country too.
With all the changes
So
with
so
AI right now, how do you think that would how do you say this? How that would affect the intellectual property law?
yeah,
Yeah.
so there's
Yeah,
kind of
sure. Yeah.
two. Well, I'm going to break that my answer into two categories. There's kind of like all the changes with AI and tech are changing all law to a certain extent, like how the law gets applied, and then also it's changing a little bit now, but probably more in the future, how lawyers work. So I'm going to break that down. It's like the legal issues, and then like the practical issues. So in terms of the legal issues, like not just AI, but tech is just really starting to influence all aspects of law. One of my interests is antitrust law. There's just a ton of tech things going on in antitrust law right now. Maybe one of the most famous related to tech would be that Google was found to be a monopoly over the summer, which is a really a big deal for antitrust law, right? And then there's all kinds of tech antitrust things going on, but there's also just like, if you look at, technology and especially privacy law are really influencing all areas of law right now. You look at the biggest First Amendment issue that I know of right now is like the ban on TikTok, right? That's a big First Amendment issue. And it's a tech issue, right? And there's so many of these things where it's like, it's a legal issue, but it's comes from technology. And so really AI and tech are changing the way all laws are applied because they just affect so many areas of our lives.
Yeah.
Also, kind of separately, and we can talk about this too, is like it people are starting to say, well, chat GPT, generative AI, am I going to need a lawyer in the future?
Yeah, you
And
should.
I'll
Yeah,
tell you
you
kind of
need.
my quick answer, and then we can dive more into it. Yeah. So my
Yeah,
quick answer is like ChatGPT is not a lawyer. Get a real one, because there's so many things in
yeah,
litigation where a tiny detail can make you win or lose, and AI is not ready for that yet. But I do think it's
yeah,
going to really change how productive lawyers are. In fact, my two latest patents that are pending are both on processes
yeah,
that help lawyers to use AI to
yeah.
be more productive without sacrificing the accuracy
Going
that
back
they
to a
have
point
to
that
have to
you need
win.
to hire a lawyer, let's talk about that because I think people say that, hey, if I just ask ChatGPT this, they know the law. But the point is, ChatGPT is just a collection of average knowledge from the internet interpreted in such a way that it answers your question, but it doesn't have the experience that the lawyer have.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I have the experience of working at a law firm during law school, but also before that, like
yeah,
in when I was litigating as the client, right? I had times where I would either win or lose a legal issue over what seemed like the minorest of details at the time. I mean, in a lot of ways, litigation is a war between two parties. Only one of them can win that war, and they both really want to win. If you were getting prepared to go to war, would you want to have chat gpt
yeah,
make your battle plan, or would you hire a general who had some experience? And maybe the right answer in the future is that you would have that general who would also be augmented by some artificial intelligence tools. But until AI is much, much, much better than it is now, it's a war. Tiny little details are going to become big issues later in the future, and you need someone who can
yeah,
spot all of those little details and issues. In fact, it's also not only is AI a bad lawyer, but
yeah,
in your life you should also make sure to hire good lawyers, because I've also had bad human lawyers that cost me a lot of money during my career as well. But the difference between a good lawyer and a bad lawyer makes all the difference. One of the reasons I went to law school. And so a
yeah.
good lawyer plus some AI is probably what you need, definitely not
Imagine
AI
if
instead of a good
ChatGPT
lawyer.
was in a laptop and you go to courtroom and say, "This is my lawyer," and just yeah, and ChatGPT just on the opening statement just said, "I'm sorry, but my client is actually guilty, and due to my development, I'm not allowed to lie." Yeah,
That's funny. And I mean,
yeah,
certainly something could go that wrong. But the crazy thing about the law is that you know, a minor mistake, by the time you get to trial, like a minor mistake a lawyer made 5 years earlier on
yeah.
a patent application, for example, like when you're litigating patents, you know, they use the word,
Oh,
all instead of any. That
yeah,
just, literally that difference, can mean the difference between a patent surviving
yeah.
litigation or not.
How
Like
so?
a tiny, tiny word choice
More
years
detailed
years
explanation on
earlier.
that.
So when you write your patents, what you're doing is you're
Yeah,
establishing your set of claims, right? And so let's just say that I have a patent that says, if you're doing um, A and B and C, then you're infringing and you owe me money, right? And the patent is written A and B and C, right? And you do A and B but not C. Maybe my lawyer could have written it in such a way where it could have said, well, A and B or B and C or A and B, or mix it up in different combinations, right? And so later, you know and maybe I could have thought of a better example where it's not so abstract as letters. But the point is like, later if you're doing most of if you're infringing most of my invention, but if there's something you're doing that's different than the words that my lawyer actually put in that patent, there that leaves open the door for you to just use it without permission and me to not get paid. And so it really
Yeah,
comes down to like contracts are the same way where somebody doesn't put the right I, I've never been involved in a
yeah,
case like this, but I've heard of cases where a comma changes, whether or not a comma is in the right place changes whether or not the
yeah,
contract is being breached or not. And you get to these situations where you
yeah,
really need a human that's
yeah,
able to issue spot. Again, AI can help that human. I mean, I think that's going to be the future is
yeah,
a lawyer that's augmented by a great AI. But yeah, there's a lot of cases where, especially in patent law, where in a thing what are called claims, which is the language that actually describes what claims are often compared to like when you have a deed to land, right?
yeah,
It
yeah. The
defines
plans.
the
Yeah,
deed where the land is,
yeah,
right? It says okay, the land. Old deeds like before GPS and things would say like, okay, you start at the fence post and walk 50 paces and turn left, right? And so you can kind of think of it like that, where it's having to describe the technological
yeah,
area where your invention sits that you own. And so if that's not described
yeah. Find
perfectly,
a
somebody
loophole.
can come and sit right
Yeah.
on the border,
No, I
and
love
there's nothing you
loopholes.
can do.
if
Yeah,
you get
exactly.
a good enough lawyer, probably every law is possible. But one of the main reasons why you need to get money in your life, so for great lawyers. But
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah,
basically
so true.
calculate what the person using your patent owns you? Let's say if 15% of that technology is my patent, then I should be on 15%. Is that how it works?
Yeah. You know, um,
Yeah,
So what you're talking about is called damages. So like once you
yeah,
prove that somebody is what's called infringing, meaning they're using the invention without permission, then you get to the damages
yeah,
phase. And there are a lot of different ways you can calculate damages. So like sometimes you end up in what's called reasonable royalty, where they just say,
yeah,
okay, well, you infringed,
yeah,
and we're not going to figure out these
yeah,
other analyses. We're just going to say what is a reasonable royalty, and that might be based, for
yeah,
example, on what other similar technologies are licensing for, or maybe if you license to other people,
yeah,
they might say, well, a reasonable license is what you charge to other people. Case like in the cases of competitors, you can get lost
yeah,
profits. It's harder. These other ways are harder to get than a reasonable royalty, but you
yeah,
can get this thing called lost profits, meaning you and I owned companies that competed. We were the only companies that made these certain widgets. And when you started selling
yeah,
your widget that infringed on my
yeah,
patent, it brought my sales down by this much, and so I can lost those profits. So and that's just two examples of different models. There's also sometimes
yeah,
sometimes patents are built into things called standards, like certain Wi-Fi standards might have patents in
yeah,
them, and people end up infringing those whenever they use the
yeah,
standard, and so those have a special,
yeah,
what's called a fair and reasonable non-discriminatory license. But so basically, to
yeah.
answer your question is it really depends on the facts, but generally you're going to be able to get at least as
Yeah.
much as you've
No,
charged other
I think one
people
of
if
the
you have
questions I
been
have for
charging
that
other
is,
people.
let's say I sued you and I won for 100 grand. Does that 100 grand get taxed? Yeah,
Does that 100 grand get taxed?
yeah.
I don't feel qualified to answer that. Tax law is complicated. Uh,
Would that be counted as a profit? Yeah,
you probably do. You probably do because it's probably profit. But I don't feel qualified to answer that question.
yeah,
That's an interesting intersection of. I did take tax law this last semester and I really enjoyed it,
yeah,
but we didn't
yeah.
cover
Yeah,
that
because if you
particular
don't have to
topic
pay for
enough
it,
that I
then
was
it's
answered.
reasonable
So
to create two companies that compete with each other and sue each other all the time, so that you don't have to pay taxes. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it depends on whether or not
yeah,
like it's considered replacement for damage that was done. But anyway, it is an interesting. Yeah, maybe there's a loophole there. But honestly, like by the time it's so difficult to win these patent infringement cases that by the time you do, I'm not sure that paying the taxes
yeah,
is your. If you win a big verdict, you're
yeah.
probably happy to pay
You
the
know,
taxes just because
yeah,
you won.
yeah.
You know.
You know,
I don't know about
you've
happy to
been an
pay, but
entrepreneur for almost all your life. How different is it from being a lawyer?
it's pretty different. It's pretty different. It's a different. So first of all, I mean, I'm still a law student. I'll be a lawyer a year from now if all goes well and I pass the bar. But so I can only based upon the limited work I've done speculate. But
Yeah,
it's different. It's a lot more predictable, but it's maybe not as thrilling. You know,
yeah.
when you're predictable is both good
Yeah,
and
some
bad,
some
right? When
people
you're an
like that.
entrepreneur,
Yeah,
there's no, it's not
yeah,
predictable. You might be rich, you might be poor, it might go well, it might not. There's a lot of risk and unpredictability.
yeah,
And sometimes when I was young, I enjoyed that. It was thrilling for me to have that
yeah,
unpredictability.
yeah,
Because it was hard to lose, but it was really fun winning,
yeah.
right? So being a lawyer is certainly more consistent, especially if you're working at a firm. You're not as worried about. I mean, you don't have to make. I guess the partners have to make
Yeah,
payroll, but the associates don't have to worry about that aspect of it. And so there's that part that's maybe more
yeah,
predictable, and it's thrilling in the sense that like
yeah,
you're participating in some pretty thrilling litigation sometimes, but probably not as thrilling
yeah,
as when you're the entrepreneur that wins a big account or something. So more predictability, more stability, less thrilling, but and it's
yeah,
also different. It's a different set of skills, and one you're sitting down, kind of just analyzing problems all
yeah.
day, and which I do enjoy, which is why I wanted to do it. But
It's like
when
it's
you're an
like gambling.
entrepreneur, you're the the janitor, the IT guy, the salesman,
Yeah,
like you get to
you
wear
learn
all
a
the
lot.
hats, which
You
which
know,
can,
for the
which can be fun,
past
but it's
few
also challenging.
years,
So
I know how to do graphic
yeah.
design. I know how to do some minor coding. I know how to write questionnaires. I know how to host a podcast. I know how to talk to clients. I know how to do this, do that, do that. You learn so much that it's amazing. It's like the fast track of being a man, because you need to know a lot so that you can actually succeed in what you do.
So true. You really do have to learn
Yeah,
an incredible amount. It's an interesting comparison. I did school before I was an entrepreneur, or kind
yeah,
of at the beginning of my career, and I was an entrepreneur for a long time. Then I went back to school, and it's interesting. I often think like,
yeah,
during which activity do I learn more? Because when you're starting a business and you
yeah,
have to do everything, you have to learn everything about everything. You feel like you're learning a ton, and also in law school, you feel like you're learning a ton. It's hard to compare them because they're apples and oranges, but
yeah. So
learning is thrilling no matter what, right? Whether you're doing it on
yeah,
the job
yeah,
or in school. I really enjoy it. Obviously, that's why I went back to school. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to learn. And when you're an entrepreneur, you really you get
yeah.
forced to learn all kinds of
Yeah,
things
I'm so good
you may
at
not have
graphic
even wanted
designing
to
right
know.
now that I can probably work as a graphic designer. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember doing a lot of graphic design because the graphic designer, when you're
Kind of
just
high
starting
one.
out, that's an expensive thing,
Yeah.
and you're like, well,
Especially with
it's
Canva
not
right
that
now.
hard, Oh yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
used Canva. I learned the Adobe Suite stuff like Illustrator and Photoshop and
Yeah.
stuff. And because when I was in business, I was like, look, if I just need something simple, yeah, I actually ended up doing
Yeah.
the box that went into Costco for those phone systems. I did all the graphic design on that box. I was really proud of that
Yeah.
because I'm not a designer, but
But
I couldn't afford to pay somebody to do it. And it was fun to like go into the
yeah,
store and see
yeah,
this big
yeah.
display that I'd done. So and it could because the boxes for
They should
those
be
phone
big because
systems
they have a
were
lot of wires.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of what they're comparable to. They were big. Yeah, I mean they were
Whoa.
just about as big as one person could carry.
yeah, yeah.
So at least because we sold some
I
with
think,
16 phones
you
in
know,
them.
I
So
think
and then they had
especially when you're
the
starting out,
system.
most of the things that you need done for a particular thing, it's so simple that it's actually gonna be harder to hire someone to go do it. It's easier to just learn the basic skill and do it yourself instead of hiring
Yeah,
someone, learning if they're good, and actually explaining what you want to be done. It's hard. It's tough to do that. Yeah,
yeah. And if they don't work out, you've spent that money. There's a lot of times where I thought, wow,
yeah,
I burned a lot of money on that. It wasn't really like
yeah,
it I didn't get that value out of it. So learning to do things yourself. Another thing that's great about when you're in business for yourself, if you can learn all the
yeah,
jobs of the people that you're working with and below you, especially,
yeah.
once you start to have a lot of employees, if you
You can
then if
feel the
somebody
yeah,
leaves, somebody gets sick
yeah.
or somebody quits, you know you can do it because
Yeah.
you
And you
don't want to
probably
not know how to
know
do a
if you're
critical
hiring someone, let's
function,
say
right?
you want to hire someone for sales and you've been doing sales for your company for a while. You know who doesn't actually you know the people who's just bullshitting you, who doesn't actually know. But yeah, yeah, because you've done it. They can't
Right.
fake being good
Yeah.
at it because you probably at least know
Hmm.
some aspects of it. I think what I like more
Yeah.
about being working for yourselves is it's like gambling, but I don't want to say gambling, but yeah, it's like just the more enhanced version where you have more control on whether you're gonna win or not, but there's still the aspect of luck on it. That it's still exciting. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And it is exciting. There is
you
definitely an
become an
element
addict over
of
time, but
gambling in it too.
gotta love it. Yeah. What advice would you give
That's so
for
true.
maybe young people who wants to be entrepreneurs, wants to invent something, or just generally start a business?
Yeah. So my advice for young people that want to start a business, I would say certainly I think something that's really
Yeah,
important to do, and this advice applies to just about anything, but choose something, choose a
yeah,
business that you're going to enjoy doing, because you like whatever you do, you're going to be doing a lot of it. And part of the reason I enjoyed my career as an
yeah,
entrepreneur so much is because I really like tech, and I
yeah,
was designing and building tech stuff, and I love tech. And so I
yeah,
think if I had been making dog food, even if I was
yeah,
making money doing it, it would have been harder to survive the hard times. So for
yeah,
me, that was important to find something that I was passionate about. And then also just
yeah.
stick with it. It's as we kind of
You
talked about
know,
earlier.
yeah.
You know, it,
I've
it
heard
takes
this
some
quote
resilience.
that is,
Go ahead.
not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. Are you someone who likes to read books? And if you are, what books would you recommend?
Yeah, I do like to read books for sure. It's
Yeah.
interesting because once you get into law school,
Oh,
like
yeah.
there's so much reading that it's like so I listen to Audible to fall asleep at night, but just like fun stuff for the most part. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's been a
Yeah.
while
I,
since I don't know if I've got any recommendations offhand because I just it's been a
I
while
think I
since
have
I've
a
read a
law book
non-law
here.
book. But
The Revised Penal
let's see,
Code,
what does it
Criminal
say?
Law, 14th edition, Book 1, Article 1 to 113. It's a very old book. Yeah.
Is it
Philippine law. I think it
is it
was my
U.S. law or
father's.
Philippine?
Yeah.
Nice.
But it's
Oh,
so.
that's cool.
No, criminology, policeman.
Was he a lawyer?
Yeah. I think I don't know because
Oh, interesting.
I think in the US anyone could be a cop, right? But yeah. But here there's more
A cop?
regulations.
Maybe,
You have
yeah.
to be at least a college graduate, probably criminology student where I don't know if there's a lot of people who studies criminology in the US, but I don't even know. Yeah.
I don't know. I took a criminology class at
I, yeah.
at Harvard Extension
I
that I really
have some
enjoyed
friends where
from an
they're
FBI
taking this
agent.
course.
But
It's so freaking hard that you should be a fucking lieutenant if you graduate because it's tough. You need to be a semi lawyer, a semi doctor, a semi policeman to actually just pass it.
I really
Yeah,
enjoyed the criminology class I took. I really enjoyed.
yeah,
We spent a lot of time
yeah,
studying why people become criminals, which was a really fascinating subject, and what
yeah,
sentencing and things are appropriate. It was a really interesting topic. I personally don't want to practice criminal law or be in
yeah,
law enforcement just because like
yeah,
for me it's psychologically hard. It's like tolling. to deal with
Yeah.
that. I respect the people that can, because
Yeah.
it's just not. I don't know. It's just, it would be hard for me
That's
to deal
amazing.
with
And
the
since we're
criminal
nearing the
justice
end of the
system.
podcast, do you have any other last messages?
Um, I don't think so. No, no. I really. I mean, I really enjoyed doing this, and
Yeah.
we've talked about a lot of really interesting things. Yeah, it was fun to chat, and yeah, anyone who is listening, I appreciate them
Oh yeah, I don't
taking the
think
time
I
to
think I
listen to us chat.
interrupted you when you were giving book suggestions. But yeah, if you have some, feel free to share it. My apologies.
I don't think
Yeah.
I have any, because I everything that I've read in the last 5 years has been a textbook or something I was, needed to read for school. So I don't know much about the
So
new books. Maybe after I graduate,
where
I'll
can people find you?
build up my list again. Yeah, probably on LinkedIn. So my name is spelled Rix,
Yeah.
Rix, Ricecamp,
Yeah,
Ryskamp, and I'm probably the only Rix Ricecamp on LinkedIn. Oh, that's not true. I guess my son has the same name, but
that's amazing.
there's
And
only a
I just
handful of
want to thank
us.
you for
So
joining us on the New World Podcast. That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming new world. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them via the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important, and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.